Order. Mrs. Sharon Hodgson to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Weston. It is an honour to serve under your chairmanship this fine morning. I beg to move that this House has considered the provision of auditory verbal therapy. I really also thank all honourable members, especially new members who've come along here today to speak in this all-important debate, which I've had the privilege of opening today. So I thank the Minister, my honourable friend, the Member for Aberfan Masteg, and the Shadow Minister, the Honourable Member for Hinckley and Bosworth, for attending this debate this morning also. And I'm delighted to see Sam and his parents in the gallery today, whom I met when I sponsored the AV UK's parliamentary drop-in back in October, I think it was, last year. How time flies. And can I just say, at that reception, I was talking to Sam and some of the other young people there, and I asked if there was any deaf children who'd come along, to be told that all the children I'd been talking to were actually deaf, including Sam. This is the difference that this therapy can make, and why I am so passionately supporting making this case today. So, Sam was diagnosed as being profoundly deaf at 5 weeks old. And it wasn't until Auditory Verbal UK was recommended to Sam's parents by a friend of a friend, by chance, that his fate changed forever. Because with the help of auditory verbal therapy, Sam learned to listen and talk just like his peers. Now, 13 years old, Sam can speak and do anything he puts his mind to. He is doing really well at school, I'm told, and will enjoy the same opportunities as his hearing friends. And for children like Sam, Auditory Verbal UK has been life-changing. Their specialist work and support to deaf children and their families is truly remarkable. I'm therefore glad to also see representatives from AV UK here today, and they will always have my support and should be very proud of the work that they do. So Sam stands here today as living proof that when deaf children and their families have access to early effective support to develop language and communication, opportunities are transformed. And if the government or anyone here today or anyone watching at home needs convincing of the clear and compelling existing evidence of the benefits of auditory verbal therapy, they will only have to look to children like Sam. While all deaf children would benefit extraordinarily from auditory verbal therapy, the truth is they won't all be as lucky as Sam. The current reality is that more than 90% of deaf children under the age of 5 in the UK are unable to access auditory verbal therapy because there is little to no provision through publicly funded services. Currently, there are a mere 33 certified auditory verbal therapists in the UK. And it is clear that these wonderful therapists who hold the potential to transform the lives of our deaf children are sadly few and far between. In the whole of the North East, there are no qualified auditory verbal therapists. Deaf children in my constituency of Washington and Gateshead South, for example, will be unable to access this support through publicly funded services. And this postcode lottery type approach to healthcare is simply unacceptable. This is in spite of public research which shows that a huge 83% of adults from the North East believe that auditory verbal therapy should be available to all deaf children via publicly funded services. And we know that this therapy works, and we know that there is public support for its rollout throughout the country. So, what are we waiting for? Raising awareness that this support is out there is just the first hurdle. Because if impacted families are aware of the therapy but have no qualified therapists in their area, their challenges persist. Even for Sam, his journey from discovering auditory verbal therapy to completing it was far from smooth sailing. With no access to the therapy via public services local to him, he and his family had to travel weekly from Oxfordshire from Eastbourne to Oxfordshire from Eastbourne, so they could access this life-changing therapy. Now, not all deaf children and their families can afford the privilege of time or money to go to such lengths every single week, as much as they may want to. And certainly not all deaf children have the privilege of having a qualified therapist in their area. So this is a clear problem, and we absolutely need to address this clear inequality of access. To extend access, we need to train more specialist practitioners in auditory verbal therapy. By training a small proportion of the current public sector workforce of speech and language therapists, audiologists and teachers of the deaf, to equip them with the additional skills in this approach, we can then enable every family who wants their deaf child to learn to listen and talk to be able to access auditory verbal therapy through publicly funded services close to where they live. And, Mr Weston, this training is already happening, with UK professionals already qualified and others on their training journey. This is only possible thanks to the fundraising efforts of the charity Auditory Verbal UK, including 2 teachers of the deaf in the North East who remain in training at the moment. There is a clear training route for professionals to become trained in auditory verbal therapy, as well as a cohort of public sector professionals who can then share their experience of training and how it has enhanced their practice. Research further points towards the fact that, as a result of pursuing this training and qualifying as listening and spoken language specialists, professionals recognise significant growth in their knowledge and skills, therefore equipping them to train others who can then do the same, and so on. Hence the train the trainers model. So, Mr Weston, there are around 50,000 deaf children in the UK, 7,200 under the age of 5. They currently face the prospect of lower academic achievement, lower employment, and are at a higher risk of poor mental health, bullying and social exclusion. Deaf children are almost twice as likely as all children to complete their first year of school without having achieved a good level of development with the Early Years Foundation. These statistics clearly highlight a stark difference in quality of life, educational attainment, employment rates and mental well-being between hearing and non-hearing peers. Given this, if the moral argument is not convincing enough, surely no one can deny the huge economic returns. Economic analysis based on Her Majesty's Treasury guidelines show that an investment of just £2 million per year for the next 10 years for training a proportion of the existing public sector workforce could deliver a whopping £152 million of economic benefit to the UK. That is a massive £11.7 billion over a 50-year period. The economic savings are therefore huge. They include £3.4 billion through less one-to-one support needed through primary school, £1 billion of increased employment, £4 billion due to increased quality of life, £7.5 million decrease in government support, and £30.5 million saved through avoided injury. This is clearly a small economic investment which will transform the lives of some of the most vulnerable children in this country, while also bringing us huge economic returns. Surely this is a no-brainer. So long as the UK remains unconvinced, we are falling behind as other countries trailblaze the way. Auditory verbal therapy is already state-funded in countries including Australia, New Zealand and Denmark, and success rates in these examples speak volumes. In 2022, following a successful government-funded pilot in Denmark, which showed that 84% of the children acquire age-equivalent spoken language after just 3 years of AVT, compared to 30% previously, auditory verbal therapy became part of the standard healthcare system there. The irony is, here in the UK, we are now training many of the Danish professionals in AV therapy to deliver this to children there, despite being unable to support our own workforce to enhance their skills to get these outcomes for our children here in the UK. This cannot be right, surely. To conclude my remarks, Mr Weston, I thank the Minister for his time and I would like to leave him with these 3 questions. What scope is there for the UK Government to look to implement a pilot scheme in the same way Denmark did, to at least prove the transformational potential of this therapy in a couple of areas for those who remain unconvinced? Second, will he commit to supporting the need to increase access to auditory verbal therapy and provide the investment needed when funding allows? And thirdly, will the Minister meet with the Deaf Children and Families and Charity Auditory Verbal UK, who are here today, to hear from them firsthand about the impact of this early support and the tangible plans they have that would enable families to access this wherever they live in the UK? So, I thank him in advance. I look forward to hearing all of the other speakers in today's debate, and I look forward to hearing the Government's response after listening to colleagues' perspectives in this very important debate this morning. Thank you.
I remind members that if they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. The question is that this House has considered the provision of auditory verbal therapy. I never thought I'd be saying these words. It's my pleasure to invite to speak Mr. Jim Shannon.
Thank you so much. Can I, first of all, Mr. Chairman, wish you well in the new role as Chair for Westminster Hall debates. I hope that there'll be many occasions when you'll be able to call me. Maybe not always first, but certainly call me to speak, and it's a pleasure to see you in that place. Can I also say what a pleasure it is to see the Minister in his place, and I look forward to his response, and the Shadow Minister, who has a deep interest in health issues as well, and we look forward to those contributions. I think a special thanks to the Honourable Lady for Washington and Gateshead South for bringing this very important topic to the Chamber of Westminster Hall for debate, and for a very compassionate introduction of the subject matter in a way that shows her deep interest in the subject matter to make lives better, which of course is the reason why we're all here. This issue is one which affects children throughout this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and it is challenging when you read some of the information sent across by the Auditory Verbal UK, which states, and I quote, deaf children in the United Kingdom currently face a lifetime of disadvantage without access to early and effective support to develop language and communication. And less than 10% of deaf children who could benefit from auditory verbal therapy to learn to listen and talk can currently access it. Now that's the key issue and the key ask of where we are. And I believe that this debate today gives us an opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to raise the awareness, number one, and to make help available for all the deaf children who need this support across this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. To consider that this means that 90% of children who could find a benefit to improve their life and also their social, their educational and their working future life, because we're planning, I suspect the government is not just planning for today for children with deafness, but also for their engagement in working life in the future. And they're not able to access this help is something that does not sit well with me personally, or indeed with any of us here. And I know very much that the Minister will feel the same angst about the issue as well, and that's why I'm looking forward very much to his response to the request today. It is very clear, Mr. Chairman, that more must be done to facilitate that access to auditory verbal therapy. And that's why I'm happy to support my honourable friend and honourable lady and speak on behalf of the deaf children in my area and indeed throughout Northern Ireland. And the figures are, the Consortium for Research and Deaf Education for Northern Ireland found that there were at least just 1,428 deaf children in Northern Ireland. 77% of school-aged children with that attended mainstream schools. 1% attended mainstream schools with resource provisions, which is what they should be, whilst 21% attended special needs schools not specifically for deaf children. So there is, and I know it's a devolved matter, so the Minister has no responsibility for it, but in the overall picture of the figures, I think they're reflective of what happens in the United Kingdom mainland as well. 36% of deaf children were recorded as having another additional special educational need, which is also an increase from 27% in 2021. I'm afraid that these stats that I'm going to quote and have quoted already, and will quote other ones, are not good reading, because they do illustrate where the shortfall is and where there's a need. And I know that my staff and my office have been in touch with the department back home to chase up on this matter. An issue which that report raised was that the number of qualified TODS in employment working in a peripatetic role in resource provision and or in a special school or college, not specifically for deaf children, has decreased by 7% since 2022, just in the last 2 years. But it's decreased by 40% since the survey first started in 2011. A real need to have those who are able to train and help and give young deaf children the opportunity to do better and to get ready for employment in the future as well. So I'm very keen to hear the Minister's thoughts, and obviously there'll be another role for the Education Minister perhaps in that as well. It is clear that there's a real need to focus on how we are supporting these children, and it does appear that there's much more to be done, and I suppose that's the ultimate reason for the debate. 80% of children who attend an auditory verbal therapy programme for at least 2 years achieve the same level of spoken language as their hearing peers. Wow, there's why you need it, and there's the results whenever you have it. Rising to 97% of children without additional needs. They are attaining educational outcomes on a par with hearing children, and the majority attend mainstream schools. This truly does speak for itself, and the fact that an investment of just over £2 million per year over the next 10 years, government could transform the landscape of auditory verbal provision and unlock £152 million of economic benefit. When you look for the returns on the investment you do, they always say that you have to speculate to accumulate. In reality, you have to spend the time and the money with the children to ensure that the economic benefit for all of us, especially for them, rises to £11.7 billion within the next 50 years. So spend that money early and get the returns, but more importantly, help people to prepare for life. Mr. Chairman, we must ensure that UK-wide children have access to this most basic of support, and that we give them the lifelong tools which are beneficial for them and for society as a whole. We are long past, I believe, the days of believing that being born with a different ability means a different life. There are just too many success stories for us to believe that this is a death sentence for normality. And I think what I'm seeking in this debate today, personally, is to ensure that the opportunity for young deaf children is the same opportunity that there is for those who aren't. And if I can do that, I'd be very pleased. We know that a full life can be achieved, but the groundwork must be done in this place with sustained UK funding for auditory verbal therapy. And I look very much forward to the Minister to outline how and when we can expect more of this for those who need it most. And I would be very pleased if the Minister could perhaps maybe, has he had the opportunity in the short term that time that he's had in the place, to have a contact with the Health Minister in Northern Ireland and with the other ministers who have responsibility, just to see perhaps how we can exchange ideas, do it better together, and how we can raise the awareness, which is very important. Thank you so much.
Gareth Entwistle.
Thank you, Mr. Weston, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Washington and Gateshead South, for bringing forward this really important debate. Today we come together with a shared purpose to champion equity, opportunity and the unshakable belief that every child deserves the best possible start in life. This debate is about more than a single policy. It's about ensuring no family feels left behind when it comes to their deaf children's future. 65% of deaf children complete their first year of school without achieving a good level of development. 65%. That's not just a statistic, it's a rallying cry that demands urgent action. And why is this happening? The National Deaf Children's Society offers a stark insight. We are failing to assess and to invest in the right primary support mechanisms for each deaf child. This failure is a systemic one and strikes at the most crucial time, the early years, when the foundations of language and communication are being laid. What's more, the Deafness Resource Centre is clear that early childhood development is deeply social and emotional, thriving on successful interactions with caregivers. By failing to provide tailored support to deaf children, we are risk leaving many feeling isolated, frustrated and deprived of the sense of belonging that every child deserves. I am deeply grateful that one such primary support mechanism, auditory verbal therapy, is being recognised here today. For so many families, it is truly transformative, and the proof is right here in this room. And I commend my honourable friend, the member for Washington and Gateshead South, for her unwavering commitment to improving its provision. But let's be clear, auditory verbal therapy is not a silver bullet. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Every deaf child is unique, and so are their needs. Auditory verbal therapy is incredibly important, but I want to take a moment to emphasise the importance of addressing each child's needs on a case-by-case basis. Picture this, a deaf child in a deaf family thriving in a sign-first environment where British Sign Language nurtures heartfelt, seamless connections with their loved ones. Now imagine another child, their confidence flourishing through intensive auditory verbal therapy. Both scenarios are valid, both are beautiful. What truly matters is meeting the unique needs of each child, guided by expert assessment. Mr Weston, the Bolton Deaf Society, located in my constituency of Bolton North East, is a charity I am deeply proud to represent and support in Parliament. Their work serves as a beacon of hope and heritage for deaf children and their families. They champion deaf culture, celebrate British Sign Language, and recognise that oral communication is not and should never need to be for everyone. While auditory verbal therapy can be life-changing, there are many within the deaf, deafened and hard-of-hearing community in Bolton who would not choose it even if it were readily available. But for some families, auditory verbal therapy is tied to the medical model of disability, a framing that implies hearing loss as something to fix, potentially sidelining deaf culture, identity and pride. And of course, for other families, like many we have heard about today, this is not the case. And Mr Weston, for the families in Bolton who are seeking auditory verbal therapy for their child, I absolutely, wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend, the member for Washington and Gateshead South, that we must urgently train more specialist practitioners to extend access. In Bolton alone, there are over 300 deaf children, and across the northwest that number rises to 6,000. Yet there are just 5 certified auditory verbal therapists in our entire region. Right now, as my honourable friend mentioned, a postcode lottery determines whether a family can access the support their child needs. This is not equity, this is not fairness, this is a failure we must urgently address. Mr Weston, deaf children in Bolton deserve better, and I strongly urge the Minister to expand access to AVT across the northwest. But more than this, I urge him to expand access to primary support mechanisms across the board. Success lies in providing a well-funded, comprehensive, holistic system of support, ensuring every child can thrive in the way that fits them best. I sincerely hope the Minister agrees.
James Frith.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Mr Weston, it is a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship, and may I also congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Washington and Gateshead South, on both the contribution as well as the securing of this important debate to ensure that this profound therapy is better heard, better known and more available to choose for the great many in our society. Mr Weston, it can feel that there is so much, that when there is so much to resolve, there is so much to fix and sort out, that smaller causes will struggle to be heard or seen, that our politics is too busy, or for even more causes to care about, it's all just too much, or that, well, in fact, Parliament last time did good things for the deaf community, or that to expect new money for new causes is a stretch too far, naive even. But we must believe in better than this. Each Parliament has the opportunity to address the underserved, those issues for which, with the right political heat and weight, can be transformed. Such issues have long been on the roll of government successes, whatever the political weather. Think of the long-standing injustices, new medicines on the NHS, or social equalities. The missions of this government are what delivered its enormous parliamentary majority. A mandate to renew, to reform, to transform. Auditory verbal therapy brings the government's vital missions for health, for children and the smashing of barriers to opportunity, and for growth, and brings them to life. This cause gives these missions cause to blossom. There may not be a better example of a cause that, for such a fraction of an investment, can be transformational. Now, I know we won't be greenlit today, Mr. Weston, but I do know what we need. Former health secretaries I've met with have spoken of the whiteboard moment. Get the issue to the whiteboard. That's the goal. That's the moment when the Minister asks their civil service teams to make this possible, to draft the plan to take us from where we are to where we need to be. A pilot, a tester, a starter for 10. Not just to take our words for it, but for the government to see for themselves. And should there be concern among our deaf community, let me say, this is not about undermining the celebrated, protected status of British Sign Language. We celebrate BSL as a language, a unique cultural identity. And the last Parliament's recognition of BSL in law was a landmark achievement. The argument for auditory verbal therapy is one of choice. Choice for the child, their family and future, to ensure families have the knowledge and support to choose the best path for them. Not competing choices, but accessing them all. The demand is that they must be heard, and the majority of the country agrees. In a recent YouGov poll, 85% of UK adults believe auditory verbal therapy should be available to all children via publicly funded services like the NHS. The first years of a child's life are critical. This is when their brains are most receptive to language and communication. For deaf children, early intervention is essential. Auditory verbal therapy enables deaf children to develop listening and spoken language skills, equipping them to thrive alongside their hearing peers. With AVT, 97% of deaf children without additional needs achieve age-appropriate spoken language within 2 years. That's the transformation we seek. And it's not a big ask, but it has giant implications for the potential impact AVT can have. If we can reach that whiteboard moment, having civil service teams work with experts to bring this therapy into NHS early years programmes, this preventative healthcare at its best, cost-effective, compassionate, life-changing. In the moment of learning your child is deaf, navigating this world will be disorientating, unsure and complex. It is also a moment we should ensure that parents learn that there's a therapy that could help your child communicate on a par with their hearing peers. Absolutely. This choice should be as freely considered as learning to sign and traditional or developing means. Withholding this therapy, having learned of its existence, cannot remain the position. But just learning of its availability, only to be told it is unavailable, unaffordable, or simply not an option where you live, is the reality for far too many families. With only 33 certified auditory verbal therapists across the UK, access to AVT is exclusive and rare. Most families will never hear of it. By removing these barriers, we can give parents and their children the opportunity to decide for themselves. This means training more therapists, supported by government bursaries to meet growing demand, building regional hubs, expanding telepractice services, leaving no family behind, raising public awareness, ensuring families know AVT is an option. And if the heart of the argument doesn't move us, the head can. This is economic growth, a sound investment in their future and ours. This cause isn't just transformational for families, Mr Weston, it's transformational for the economy. For 2 million annually, a fraction, a rounding error of the NHS budget, we could ensure that thousands of deaf children access AVT. According to economic projections over 50 years, this investment would unlock £11.7 billion in benefits, according to independent economic analysis. And here's how. Reduced education costs. Early intervention means less reliance on one-to-one support, saving £3.4 billion. Increased employment, confident, independent, deaf adults contributing £1 billion to the economy. Improved quality of life, thriving, independent individuals generating £4 billion in societal benefits. Without early intervention, the costs are far greater. Delayed support leads to unfulfilled promise or potential, higher unemployment, mental health challenges, and the long-term reliance on public services. The new government hasn't wasted any time on identifying waste to be cut from its spending. The Cabinet Office has pledged to reduce £7 billion spent per year on consultants. Official analysis found that in 2022-23, total spending on consultancy was £1.2 billion. Among the highest spenders in 22-23 were the Department for Health and Social Care at £281 million on consultants. So I share this government's instincts. The money saved must now transform the lives of those accessing AVT. Does the Minister agree? For just £2 million a year, we can train more specialists, remove the barriers to opportunity, expand access through the NHS, ensure every family makes informed decisions. We're not asking for those decisions today, Mr Minister. We're asking for the commitment to start this journey, to draft the plan that takes us from this underserved system to one that provides choice and opportunity to every deaf child and their family in the UK. With parents given every option to choose for them, their children are given the best chance to thrive. And when all deaf children thrive, our society is stronger, more inclusive and more prosperous. This underserved issue can benefit from this government's mission to transform. And as the campaign says, hear us now.
Hear.
Yasmin.
Thank you, Mr Weston, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I want to thank the Honourable Member for Washington and Gateshead South for bringing today's debate here, and my colleagues and others who have just spoken in this. I don't want to repeat a lot of what everybody has already said, but I just want to mention a few things. As has been mentioned, there are numerous benefits that auditory verbal therapy provides for deaf children, particularly with regard to educational prospects. We need to bridge the gap between the educational attainment of deaf children and their classmates, a gap created due to barriers faced by deaf children, to realistically integrate in the classroom. With an investment in an AVT programme, we can overcome those barriers. In 2019, the average deaf GCSE student faced a 17.5-month gap in learning from their classmates with no special needs. This is only a 3-month decrease from 2011, so not a lot has changed. AVT would help deliver the promise of bridging this gap by intervening in the earlier stages of language development. Accessing this early intervention lays the foundation for a more successful future, which will help deaf children realise their educational potential and will be an integral part of boosting their self-esteem, ensuring that they are not hindered in their ability to interact with their friends, classmates and participate in lessons. ABT also has the potential to foster this sense of social inclusion and therefore provide deaf children with the skills and confidence to succeed at the same level of their peers who have no special needs, both in the classroom and beyond. There are currently 7,200 deaf children below the age of 5, which is a target subset of ABT. As it stands, and we've heard this, there are not enough qualified auditory verbal therapists. I believe there's only 33 in the whole country. And therefore, we need more of these people to be able to see the children. But of course, one of the challenges faced by a lot of families is that many of them do not have sufficient spare money to spend on it. And because it's so limited in its service, and because the whole provision is so hit and miss across the whole United Kingdom, that presents even more a challenge. Thus, a programme that will train speech and language therapists in ABT will make sure that all deaf children have equal access to quality therapy. So it is a cause that the government is well worthy of spending money on. And in fact, we train professionals from other countries who come and then go back to their countries, like Denmark and others. Our deaf children deserve the same care and attention. And I think we must not forget there are 50,000 deaf children in our country. With this successful initiative, and if we train more of these therapists, as the Honourable Member for Bury South has just said, that this Bury North has just said, that this morally we must look after our young people, but it makes economic sense as well to ensure that they're well educated, that they're able to integrate and be part of a fantastic workforce that we need future. And I just finally, before I end, I want to thank the campaigners and the families who've been campaigning on this and the tremendous work that you have done. And again, I thank the Honourable Member for Washington and Gateshead South for bringing this really important matter for debate here. And finally, I have to declare an interest. I myself, although not deaf in the sense of these children, I am hard of hearing myself, so it's something that's quite close to me personally.
Baggy Shank.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Mr Weston, and I also want to thank my honourable friend for raising this incredibly important topic and securing this debate today. You may not know, but Derby and Derbyshire has the largest deaf community outside of London. The Royal School for the Deaf sits in my neighbouring constituency of Derby North, and the staff there do an absolutely fantastic job working to support deaf children and young people to access the very best education that they can. But despite the work of specialist schools like these, nationally, deaf children face huge educational inequality, compounded by the lack of access to critical therapies like auditory verbal therapy. It's staggering, really, that only 38% of deaf children in England completed their first year of school having achieved their expected levels of development, compared with 66% of all children. We have seen huge strides, Chair, forward in support for our deaf community, with pioneering gene therapy delivered just last year, which allowed a UK girl born deaf to hear unaided. Medical professionals across the country should rightly be recognised for their hard work in delivering innovative treatments like these to support our deaf community. These success stories should be celebrated, but unfortunately, access to critical therapies and support is often unequal, with less than 10% of deaf children in the UK currently able to access it. Auditory visual therapy is one of those inequalities. children in the East Midlands and across the UK will be missing out on the benefits it can offer. And those benefits are, as we've heard today, life-changing, with research showing that 80% of deaf children following AVT therapy approach can achieve age-appropriate spoken language. That's an incredible opportunity that they're missing out on. But let's be really honest here. It's absolutely no surprise that the provision of AVT therapy is a postcode lottery. Years of Tory austerity have brought the NHS to its knees. But I have been so pleased to see our Labour government turning the page on this austerity nightmare, committing the biggest NHS funding uplift since 2010 outside of COVID. And it's vital that AVT provision sees the benefits of Labour's investment into our public services, supporting deaf children and their families wherever they live in the UK.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr Weston. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. Obviously, I want to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Washington and Gateshead South for bringing this debate, and indeed the campaigners, Sam and his family, and Auditory Verbal UK for campaigning on this important issue. Now, I will confess I am quite new to the issue of auditory verbal therapy. It's been fascinating to research it more for this debate and indeed to listen to the contributions of the honourable members here today. The member for Washington and Gateshead South has made a hugely compelling argument for the improvement of access to auditory verbal therapy, not only in terms of the benefits for the children who would be able to access it and improve their ability to listen and to speak, but also for the economic benefit that would derive from what is, I think we can all agree, a very small investment. As an accountant, I can confirm that 2 million is probably a rounding error in most instances. I also just want to thank the other members who've made really useful speeches today, not least the member for Bury North who highlighted the importance of early intervention, and the member for Derby South who highlighted the educational impact that early access to appropriate therapy can provide. Now, there are more than 50,000 deaf children in the UK. Around 7,200 are under the age of 5. 90% who are born to hearing parents, so parents without the experience of dealing with hearing impairment. And although deafness isn't a learning disability, there's a significant attainment gap, as we've heard, facing deaf children during their time at school, with the educational outcomes being poorer. And as we've also heard, there's a higher risk of poor mental health. People who are deaf are less likely to have decent employment, and they suffer generally from inequality as a result of being hearing impaired. And it's important to say up front that all deaf and hearing impaired people have the right to participate in society fully and independently. And at the moment, too often, these rights aren't fully being realised. Liberal Democrats believe, as I'm sure other honourable members from all parties do, that every deaf child deserves the best possible start in life, the opportunity to flourish with them and their families supported so that they can express themselves and communicate with ease in a way that's most comfortable to them. The honourable member for Bolton North East highlighted that a range of therapies is the best way to support families facing having a child who is deaf, and that they should be able to exercise choice when deciding which therapy is most suitable for them. Now, under Section 17 of the Children Act 1989, local authorities in England have a duty to safeguard and promote the welfare of children within their area who are in need by providing a range and level of services appropriate to those children's needs. And a child is defined as in need as if they are disabled, and the Act says that a child is considered disabled if they are deaf. So we are in a position where local authorities, it seems, must be compelled to provide appropriate support for deaf children and their families. And the National Deaf Children's Society notes that in some cases local authorities will provide funding to help a child access AVT. The problem is, I think, that the government has confirmed that audiology services are commissioned locally, and the responsibility for meeting the needs of non-hearing children lies with National Health Service Commissioners. And this leaves us with the dreaded postcode lottery. And it would be helpful to see the government provide guidance to local authorities on the level of support that they should be providing, obviously in the context of this debate, particularly with reference to AVT. Locally in Shropshire, head teachers reported inability to access basic speech and language therapy for hearing children. And the strain on local government finances is clearly going to have a significant impact on what is available to children in each area. And I wonder if the Minister could confirm in his summing up really whether this is going to sit as a Department for Health responsibility or a local government responsibility, because I think sometimes therapies such as this might fall between the gaps between the two, and it would be useful to understand how it can be best delivered. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm slightly new to this topic, but Liberal Democrats have long campaigned for better support for people who are deaf, particularly communicating through British Sign Language. We'd like it to have official equal status to the UK's other languages. We'd like to see free access to sign language lessons for parents and guardians of deaf children. And welcome all the developments in improving outcomes for deaf children, including developments in technology like cued speech visual systems, which have a major centre in the constituencies of my colleagues in Devon. I also just wanted to echo the member for Gateshead and Washington South call for a pilot scheme, which seems to me a very sensible way forward. The existing research on AVT is very promising, but the evidence base is still narrow, and a pilot scheme seems to me to be the best way to broaden that evidence basis and convince those who haven't yet been convinced by meeting children who've benefited so profoundly from the therapy. And more broadly, the government should strengthen the availability of basic speech and language therapy, training for people working with children, to ensure that children who are struggling with hearing impairment can be identified, their progress monitored and supported, and an equal outcome found for them. So in conclusion, Mr Weston, I wonder if the Minister, as I mentioned, could confirm whether the provision of AT would be the responsibility of the Department for Health to move forward, or whether it would be a local government issue, bearing in mind that the provision of such assistance comes through local government, and whether he could confirm that the 10-year plan will address services such as this for deaf children and adults, and finally whether he would consider a pilot scheme to broaden our understanding of the benefits of AVT. Thank you.
Opposition spokesperson, Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr Weston. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I would like to start by paying tribute to the member for Washington and Gateshead South for leading this debate, and to Auditory Verbal UK for their tireless advocacy in this area. And to never break parliamentary protocol, I know I should never direct comments to the audience, but I'd like to say a big thank you to Sam for being here and his advocacy, and the fact that he's able to be here and be able to take part in this debate. Maybe, just maybe, one day he'll be on these green benches advocating for further changes, but I hope that the government may well have served that purpose by then. So if Sam is listening, I hope, Chair, that's okay to put those comments through you for him. Now, as members have discussed, the provision of auditory verbal therapy was previously discussed, actually, back in the House in December 2023. And in the aftermath of that debate, I understand that AV UK held discussions with the Department of Health and Social Care and received support from the two ministers in the last government, from Maria Caulfield, former member of Lewis, and Andrea Ledson, or Dame Andrea Ledson, former member of South Northamptonshire. I'm also understand from the charity that before the election, the last government was considering how to roll out training for auditory verbal therapy, as well as upskill the existing speech and language workforce, therapist workforce. This is obviously part of the workforce plan for the NHS, and I'm pleased to see the current government is continuing in that vein. Now, it was Helen Keller that said the only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. And since this election, it appears that this government is possibly stepping back from this area. After recent written questions have indicated the government has no plans to review the adequacy of the provision of AVT and have stated doubts about the strength of the current evidence supporting its effectiveness. But today, we've heard arguments made about a range of studies suggesting that AVT therapy really can be supportive in helping deaf children develop age-appropriate spoken language and attain educational outcomes on par with hearing children. Now, it's not for us at this point in this House to make a decision, but it is for this House to raise this topic, and as a first step, can the Minister commit today to meet with Auditory Verbal UK so they can present the latest evidence and research from the UK and abroad? Now, we know that integrated care boards are responsible for commissioning services for their local communities, including the provision of auditory verbal therapy. And thanks to charitable funding and efforts from AV UK, there are now 33 certified AV therapists across the UK. However, as other members have noticed, there are still major gaps in provision, particularly in the public sector. So will the Minister therefore commission a review about the impact and effectiveness of AVT that is currently taking place in the NHS? And whilst there are 5 AV therapists in Manchester, there is just 1 for the whole of the West Midlands. And as the member for Washington and Gateshead South has mentioned, there are currently no AVT therapists in the North East, and the member for Bolton North East said there are none in the North West. This does highlight the postcode lottery, which needs to be addressed, especially when, as we've heard, there are 50,000 deaf children in the UK. Now, AV UK has argued that national guidance to ICBs could help improve the provision across England. And whilst NICE has guidance on hearing loss for adults, there's no such guidance available for children. Now, we know we need an evidence base for guidance, and given NICE are the organisation that are responsible for this, it seems reasonable to focus our attention on them. So can the Minister commit to speaking to NHS England and NICE about current guidance for hearing loss, and whether they need to update it in light of the emerging evidence around AVT? Now, much has been raised by members today on the return on investment we could see from putting more money into AVT. And AV UK have said for every £1 invested in therapy, there could be as much as a £4 return. And we've seen in other areas, for example, the Children's Hospice Grant, how a small amount of national funding can go a long way in supporting community services across England. Therefore, as decisions are made on allocation of the NHS funding announced in the autumn budget, will the Minister consider the ask from AV UK to provide funding to train more public sector workers in AVT? Now, in conclusion, Chair, it was Helen Keller again who said, "I cannot do everything, but I can do something. I must not fail to do something that I can do." So I would again like to congratulate the member for Washington and Gateshead for securing this important debate and raising these issues. Deaf children across the land are lucky to have an advocate in her. She is doing her part. I'd like to thank the members for Strangford, Bolton North East, Bury North, Bolton South and Walkenden, Derby South and North Shropshire. They too are doing their part by raising it in this debate. I would like to thank AV UK for all they do. They are doing their part. And I hope in raising constructive questions as His Majesty's opposition, I am doing my part too. So in turn, I hope the Minister will answer my questions and the ones raised today, meet with AV UK and assess their evidence, make appropriate recommendations and changes with the Department of Health and the NHS, so deaf children can reach their full potential, and he will fulfil his part.
Minister Stephen Kinnock.
Many thanks, Mr Weston. It's a great pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Washington and Gateshead, for securing this vitally important debate and for the powerful and moving contribution that she made to our discussions today. I'd also like to break with protocol and welcome Sam to Parliament today. He is clearly a remarkable young man and an inspiration to us all. So thank you very much for being here, Sam. I'd like to also add my thanks to the Shadow Minister in terms of thanking all of the excellent contributions, members for the excellent contributions they've made today. We've had a range of contributions, members for Hinckley and Bosworth, Bury North, Bolton North East, Derby South, Bolton South and Walkden, North Shropshire, Strangford and I think that may be all, but I'm with huge apologies if I've missed anybody. All of the contributions were excellent and very well put indeed. My honourable friend, the member for Washington and Gateshead, has done so much work to champion the interests of children with special educational needs and disabilities, including non-hearing children. And it's on that note, I know she has an excellent partnership with Auditory Verbal Therapy UK too, and I'd like to welcome them to Parliament today and to say that I would of course be more than happy to meet with them by way of follow-up on all of the points that were made in this debate. Mr. Weston, this government is committed to raising the healthiest generation of children ever. We will deliver on this ambition through the health and opportunity missions and through the government's child poverty strategy. Now, this is not about silos, with each department delivering one part of a puzzle which doesn't all then fit together properly. This is about systemic, holistic change and ensuring that we join up analysis, expertise and delivery across government. Our mission-driven government will drive long-lasting and sustainable change for children now and in the future. We will break down barriers to opportunity and ensure that every child has the best start in life. This includes all children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, including non-hearing children. We know that developing early communication skills is a key foundation for life, with serious knock-on consequences when development is delayed. That is why we're committed to improving access to early interventions so that every child can find their voice. With the right support, children with hearing loss can develop effective communication skills, live fulfilling lives, and enjoy the same opportunities as everyone else. The government recognises the importance of the earliest days of an infant's life. There is strong evidence that the 1,001 days from conception to the age of 2 set the foundations for our cognitive, emotional, and physical development. That is why we are giving a £126 million boost for families to give every child the best start in life. Thousands of families across England will be able to access family hubs, which act as a one-stop shop for help with infant feeding advice, parenting classes, and perinatal mental health support, amongst others. Figures from the National Deaf Children's Society show that there were more than 45,000 deaf children and young people in the UK in 2023. 1 to 2 babies in every 1,000 are born with permanent hearing loss in one or both ears. This number increases to about 1 in every 100 for babies who have spent more than 48 hours in intensive care. Early and effective support is crucial for these children and their families. Permanent hearing loss can significantly affect a baby's development, so early and effective support is crucial for these children and their families. It's vital that we intervene at birth. The NHS Newborn Hearing Screening Programme, NHSP, aims to find babies who have hearing loss as early as possible so that the right support and advice can be offered right from the start. Mr. Weston, as we all know, language is linked to social, emotional and learning outcomes. From birth through to childhood, children and young people with hearing loss might need a range of therapies, such as speech, language and auditory verbal therapy. However, as we've heard today, those children aren't always receiving the support that they need. We recognise the important role of auditory verbal therapy as one of the therapies that can be useful for children with hearing loss. NHS audiology services, including provision of therapies for children with hearing loss, are locally commissioned, and responsibility for meeting the needs of children with hearing loss lies with local NHS commissioners, because local systems are best placed to meet the needs of their own communities. Mr. Weston, after 14 years of Tory neglect, incompetence and austerity, our NHS and care service is on its knees. But this government is committed to properly funding the NHS, and we recently provided a £26 billion boost for health and social care in the autumn budget. NHS England is responsible for determining allocations of financial resources. Each ICB will then commission the services they need for their local area, taking into account their annual budget, planning guidance, and the wider needs of the population they cover. NHS England is supporting integrated care boards to make informed decisions about the provision of audiology services so they can provide consistent, high quality and integrated care to non-hearing children. In July 2016, NHS England published Commissioning Services for People with Hearing Loss, a framework for clinical commissioning groups. This framework supports NHS ICBs to make informed decisions to address inequalities in access and outcomes between hearing services. I will give way.
Thank you, Minister, you've been very kind. Would the Minister agree with me that the atomisation of our healthcare system, for all the good intentions of ICBs, if they took instruction with the guidance provided nationally, then this pillar-to-post experience for a lot of families seeking auditory verbal therapy, that experience would end? And would he commit, or at least acknowledge, that a 9-year-old guidance to those ICBs does need updating with a national pilot that proves the efficacy of AVT for those families seeking that intervention?
Yeah.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. He will know that one of the constant challenges in terms of the system is how you get the right balance between empowering those who are operating at the coalface, who are close to the communities and know those communities best, to ensure that they're delivering the best possible services for those communities, whilst also ensuring consistency and coherence, strategic and operational, across the entire system. I think it's safe to say that we are not always getting that balance right. And one of the key objectives of the 10-year planning process that we're going through will be to address this issue of the so-called postcode lottery, variation between different regions across the whole range of health and care that is provided. And I think that without having that cross-cutting strategic look at the system, it's not going to be possible to get that balance right. So I absolutely take the point, but one thing I would say is that we are crystal clear that when we issue guidance to ICBs, they must take that guidance into account, and their performance is monitored on that basis.
On that point, so am I right in thinking from what you've just said in response to my honourable friend that you are going to issue revised guidance following today's debate, that out of this extra 26 billion the government has given to local areas, that if local areas make these decisions locally, commission these services locally, that you will give that guidance that they should be looking to commission this on a much bigger scale, so we have more than 33 AVT therapists.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. What I can certainly tell her is that this is a very dynamic situation, and that a system never stands still. For a system to work, we have to be constantly reviewing its performance and whether it's delivering to its objectives. So the 10-year plan that we're producing will absolutely lead, I believe, to a radical rewiring of the way in which our health and care system works. It's going to be driven by 3 big shifts: from hospital to community, from sickness to prevention, and from analogue to digital. Now, there is no doubt at all that where there are therapies, treatments that are working, that are clearly delivering big results and also delivering value for money for the taxpayer, it is absolutely right that we give those priority in the way that we deliver. It is clear that AVT has huge potential. It appears to have unexplored potential, but I can't preempt today how this is all going to pan out in terms of the system and the reforms that we're looking to push forward. But I can assure her that we are committed to innovating, and we are committed to building a system that is fit for the future. In 2019, NHS England, with input from the National Deaf Children's Society, produced a guide for commissioners and providers who support children and young people with hearing loss. The guide provides practical advice on ensuring non-hearing children receive the support they need. Auditory verbal therapy is one type of therapy to support children with hearing loss, and it is important that local commissioners know their population and have the discretion to decide how best to meet their needs. When it comes to commissioning and providing services for children with hearing loss, we've been crystal clear with ICBs and NHS trusts that they must take the relevant guidelines into account. We recognise the real need to improve access to therapies for all children who need them, including children with hearing loss. In very difficult circumstances, the NHS has in recent years increased the number of speech and language therapists working in the NHS, but we know that more needs to be done, which is why this government is committed to fixing the NHS and building a service that's fit for the future with the workforce it needs to get patients seen on time.
The Minister giving way, and he rightly points out about trying to deal with the postcode lottery, making sure that there is reviews and shared of best practice. But if I could draw him back to my comments around actual guidelines, one of the things he could do is ask NICE to have a look at the current evidence and what should be there in terms of national guidance, because ICBs rightfully do have the right to choose what kind of treatment they think works best. They will be driven by the clinical evidence and the clinical guidelines. If there are no clinical guidelines for them to judge, they will simply make their own decisions without that guidance. Is that something he'd commit to?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question. He'll know that NICE has a prioritisation board, and ultimately that is the decision-making process for prioritising guidelines and the entire operating framework for what falls under NICE's remit. I mean, this is something that absolutely should be on the radar, and it's of course a conversation that we constantly are having with NICE around what their prioritisation is, but it is also important that they take an objective clinical stance on the question. That's why this government is committed to fixing the NHS and building a health service fit for the future with the workforce it needs to get patients seen on time. We have committed to develop a 10-year plan to deliver a national health service that's fit for the future. The engagement process has been launched, and as we work to develop and finalise the plan, I would encourage those concerned about the availability of services to support children with hearing loss, including auditory verbal therapy, to engage with that process, to allow us to fully understand what is not working as well as what should be working better and what the potential solutions are. So please do go on. I would encourage all honourable members in this room today as well to go on to change.nhs.uk to make your voice heard. This summer, we will publish a refreshed long-term workforce plan to deliver the transformed health service we will need to build over the next decade to treat patients again on time and to deliver far better patient outcomes. We're also in the process of commissioning research to understand the gaps between the supply and demand of different therapy types for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. This will help us to understand the demand for speech and language therapists and inform effective workforce planning.
Helen Morgan.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way, and I'm pleased to hear that the government has increased the number of speech and language therapists, which is so important for young people who are struggling to achieve their potential in an educational setting. But I wonder if you just address a specific point around commissioning by local authorities, because very often they are so strapped for cash, they are effectively trying to limit demand on that front.
I thank my honourable friend. I mean, commissioning is led by ICBs. It is very important that ICBs have open channels of communication with local government. We in the DHSC have very close contact and engagement with colleagues in MHCLG, and it's very important that that relationship and interaction feeds down through the entire system. But the leading organisation, if you like, on commissioning is the ICB. Now, a number of colleagues have raised the question of a pilot scheme to identify how our existing workforce can work differently. The Early Language and Support for Every Child, or HoC programme, is an excellent example of different professions coming together to support children and young people. Local authorities, schools and the healthcare and care system working together in the community to support our children and young people. The LSEC workforce model focuses on recruiting pre-qualification speech and language therapy support workers into the workforce to improve capacity and knowledge of that support children with emerging or mild to moderate speech, language and communication needs in early years and school settings. 9 regional Pathfinder partnerships are trialling new ways of working to better identify and support children in early years settings and in primary schools. We have asked Pathfinders to consider how to make the model sustainable after the project period, and the therapy assistant roles also have the potential to attract individuals to train to become speech and language therapists through the apprenticeship route. Now, also on the topic of piloting, I understand that AVT UK is progressing a National Institute for Health and Care Research grant application to support a pilot. I would welcome an update from AVT UK about how that's going when we get the chance to meet. We welcome the work that Auditory Verbal UK also is doing to upskill health professionals to deliver auditory verbal therapy. There are as yet, to the Shadow Minister's point, there are as yet no NICE guidelines on hearing loss in children, and NICE has not made any recommendations with respect to AVT specifically. Decisions on the need for guidelines on new topics and updates to existing guidance are made by NICE's prioritisation board in line with NICE's published Common Prioritisation Framework. I understand that NHS England met with Auditory Verbal UK and discussed the need for more high-level research evidence for the intervention and to develop evaluations of impact. I'm very pleased that Auditory Verbal UK have also been invited to join the Chief Scientific Officer's Audiology Stakeholder Group to contribute to decision-making. We recognise that the impact that timely access to high-quality services can have on the lives of children, including the role of different therapies to help children develop the right skills to engage with education. This government's ambition is that all children and young people with SEND or in alternative provision receive the right support to succeed in their education and as they move into adult life. We will strengthen accountability on mainstream settings to be inclusive, including through the work of Ofsted, by supporting the mainstream workforce to increase their SEND expertise and encouraging schools to set up resource provision or SEN units to increase capacity in mainstream schools. This work forms part of the government's opportunity mission, which will break the unfair link between background and opportunity, starting with giving every child, including those with SEND, the best possible start in life. We will work with the sector as essential and valued partners to deliver our shared mission and restore patients' trust. So I would once again like to thank my honourable friend for Washington and Gateshead South for securing this debate and sharing her insight on the vital issue of early interventions for non-hearing children. We recognise the importance of such services and the life-changing impact they can have on the lives of children. We are committed to ensuring that all children receive the support they need to live healthy, fulfilling lives. And I will continue to work closely with NHS England and the Department for Education as we strain every sinew to deliver on these commitments. Thank you.
Mrs. Sharon Hodgson to wind up.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Weston. Can I thank everyone who has made who's come along today and took the time and made such excellent contributions to this vital issue. Can I thank the Minister and the Shadow Minister and the lady who speaks for the Lib Dems also for listening today. I was so happy to hear that the Minister will meet with AV UK and also will explore the potential of a pilot. That is indeed great news, and hopefully you might get a chance to speak to Sam today also. That would be wonderful. I also hope he will update guidance to the ICBs if NICE deem, as we all have today, that it's very valuable, therapy, both clinically and economically. Can I also make the point that he mentions the NHS 10-year plan, but I hope that he recognises it's already been 9 years since the last guidance was updated. So, as he said, I hope that he will recognise this issue needs urgent attention, maybe towards the start of the 10-year plan rather than towards the end of it. I would be looking at getting on for 20 years then. Today we have the opportunity, and the Minister especially has the opportunity to change the fate of deaf children in this country. They deserve the same opportunities and outcomes as their hearing peers, and surely this cannot be a controversial position to take. These children are the future and we must invest in them, not only because it's the right thing to do morally, but because any financial investment will come back in economic returns in abundance. But mainly, I think we all agree we should invest in them because our children deserve it. Thank you.
Yeah.
The question is that this House has considered the provision of auditory verbal therapy. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Can I also thank Sam and family for attending this morning? Order. The sitting is now suspended until 11 o'clock.